I'm Roland Hearn, and this is A Walk in the Garden. In the late 1970s, this group of young men really hit the music scene in a big way. They'd been together for about 10 years, and they'd had some success, but then they produced the album Breakfast in America. This is Supertramp. That album was incredibly well received and became very popular. There's a song in that album called The Logical Song, which is a fun song. It's got a great little tune, but an incredibly profound message. It speaks of the struggle of moving from youth, where everything seems wonderful and magical, to becoming a responsible adult and feeling like you're being squeezed into a system where there's demands on your life, and you end up becoming a very cynical person. In that song, they describe the process of lying awake at night with questions in their head, and then there's this really wonderful statement that says, "I know this sounds absurd, but please tell me who I am." It's clearly a reflection to the issues of existentialism that I spoke about a couple of weeks ago, but the idea that they are seeking for someone outside of them to tell them who they are is a representation of the idea that the existentialist says you can't know who you are from an external means. However, at the deeper level, what it's saying is it feels like there's no real answer to that question. I want to talk about that issue today in light of the current struggles that are happening in the world today, particularly the protests and the call for social equity that's happening around the world. To be honest, I found this video way more difficult to do than what I thought it would be. See, the issues are very complex, and what I'm trying to do with it is reduce it down to a couple of small issues. But it resists that process, and yet there's still a piece of it that's worth doing. I want to try and filter what we're seeing through these three key ideas to come up with some level of explanation for the phenomena that it looks like it's young people at the front of the push for change, and it's older people and the systems that are resisting it, and sometimes quite irrationally. I desperately don't want this video to become politically charged and have people end up responding to it because of their political perspectives. It has nothing to do with politics, nor do I at any point want to seem to be minimalizing the issues at stake, nor fail to recognize that the ideas are generally true. There are lots of older people that are in the exact same place of wanting to see change come, and to be honest, there are lots of younger people that have been co-opted into the idea of keeping things the way they are. So let's recap on those three principles. The first was that love and worth are two sides of the same coin. The second principle is that the search for meaning is a search for worth. And the third one was our struggle with worthlessness is a struggle with shame. Those three concepts, when they are combined together, those three key principles amalgamate around an issue that is central to this whole process and the core of this video today. It is the question, who am I? The who am I question is a question of identity, obviously. However, the answer to that question is the reason that we do everything we do, at least the things that are most important to us. By the way, if you haven't had a chance to look at those first three videos yet, then let me encourage you to do so, because they will form the reason behind those three key ideas that I've just addressed, and and will help explain where this video fits in to that process. The Logical Song was written in the late 1970s. I remember that time well. I remember the cultural ferment that was happening. You're always seeing protests on the street. The big issues were racial injustice. I don't remember it, but I remember hearing of the March on Washington, and though that was representative of so much of the push for racial justice. Martin Luther King said the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And by so saying, he was saying that he believed we were always moving towards a day of greater equity and justice, a very optimistic perspective. There was the response to apartheid in South Africa, and the push for independence in nation states that had long been dominated by colonial powers. The Vietnam War was raging late 60s, early 70s, and there was a strong social push for change in that area. There was recognition of the destruction that was happening in the environment, and all of this was under the cloud of assured mutual destruction through the vast array of nuclear powers. And there was this response that was largely led by young people calling for change. The Logical Song then is representative of the process of growing up, thinking the world is a wonderful place, feeling pushed into the mold of the world around, and recognizing that if you ask questions against that process of conformity, then you'll potentially be labeled with constructs of being a radical or a liberal, a fanatical, a criminal, and that was a very real experience for many people. It's interesting how much of the struggle that we're dealing with today is in the same areas. Racial injustice, economic disparity, a threat to the existence of humanity in the form of the global pandemic, and there is this dis-ease, this discomfort that is being played out around the world, that's being seen in marches and challenges for change, and again, the voices tend to first of all be the voices of the young. We need those voices. We need to hear them. While on the one hand it might look like that not much change has happened, there has been a lot of change in the years in between that process and where we are now, but it isn't enough, and much more must happen. And we need to hear those voices that are calling for change. When you're young, you move from this process of having your identity shaped by your parents to one where you begin to shape that yourself and in relationship with your peers. You want a world that is just and fair, because that very own personal struggle with worthlessness would suggest that if the world is not fair, then maybe I won't be accepted and valued and loved. And so this desire for a life that is meaningful, for a life that has worth, for a place where I can be loved and accepted, is a representation of those deep inner needs. And it's a response to the world out there to try and see change happen out there so that I can experience acceptance and love and peace. And I want that for those around me. All of those ideas are actually representations of a deep desire for love, and the desire for equity is a desire for worth and validation. Yes, personally, but for others as well. As we grow older, we tend to move to a place where we have affected change, at least in our own immediate environment. We've studied, or we've learned a trade, we've gained a career, we have an income, we have family, we have homes, and it's very easy to recognize that over the course of a life, I get to assert my political opinion in terms of the environment that I've created. And so there's a shift from wanting to see change to a place where I will find acceptance, to preserving the space that I have created, in which I, at the very least, feel comfortable, if not valued and accepted. And so, so that struggle shifts, and we can tell when we are dealing with identity issues. When the reactions of people become angry and violent, you are dealing with identity issues. And it becomes incredibly important for those of us that have been around for a while to not react out of that space, but to recognize the drives that we had for young people were not unfair, they were not imbalanced. Sure, they can be mediated across a lifetime with broader perspectives, but the desire for a caring, loving, just, equitable world is the right desire and needs to be honored and valued amongst our young people. The desire for safety and for a valuing of the environment that I live in is not specifically a different desire. It's the same search. And in all of those spaces is a desire to know who I am. Am I valuable? Does my life have meaning? Will I have worth? And the extent to which my identity in that space is challenged triggers my own struggle with worthlessness, and therefore that process of reaction can rise. It happens on both sides of the equation. It happens as a result of the internalized answer to the question, who am I? But here's the truth. When we know ourselves in terms of love, there is room for other people's perspectives. There is always a desire for justice and fairness. There is always a desire for equity. And yes, I may be able to articulate a balanced perspective, at least in some issues, because of my age. But the extent to which I have lost sight of the need to change is the extent to which I have invested my own identity in the security of the world that I have created. So this video is something of a challenge to that process, but it's also a recognition that the question, who am I, is a question that is responding to those three key areas that I mentioned before. We will find the answer to those questions, the extent to which we pursue love. The truth is that in the original garden, the answer to that question was found in the presence of the Creator. The Creator told me who I am. The Creator said, you are loved, you are valued, you have purpose, you have mission. It was the original couple's own rejection or own need for another source of identity that moved them into a space of the rejection of that love. So here in this garden, let's recognize how powerful the desire for love and worth and certainly identity is. But where we find the answer to that question is in the place of love. If we don't find it there, it's never adequate, and we will always keep pursuing that answer to the question. We may find ways of
of protecting ourselves against the question. We may even find ways of assuming we've answered that question. But if it's not genuine, real, validating, equitable, gracious love, it's not an adequate answer. So let's keep walking in the garden until we find the answer to our question in that space. Well, until next week, keep walking in the garden. Keep searching for answers to those questions. See you then.